Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, I want you to picture something with me. Imagine the humid, misty, and honestly treacherous Andes Mountains of Peru, right around the early 1900s. It's the rainy season, the humidity, it's just suffocating, the jungle is incredibly thick, the high altitude is literally starving your lungs of oxygen, and way down below you can hear the roar of the Urubamba River. Well, this wild, unforgiving landscape is the stage for a world-changing mystery. And we're not just talking about stones and ancient kings here. No, this is a story about modern ambition, massive institutional machinery, and a century-long battle over the very soul of a nation. Let's dive in.
So, we have to start with a massive question. Who truly discovered Machu Picchu? Because for generations, we've all been sold this masterfully crafted narrative, right? A lone American explorer hacking his way through the untouched jungle only to stumble upon this forgotten world. But as you'll see, history is rarely that simple, and it is almost never inevitable. We're going to unpack this fierce geopolitical battle over human history, looking at the psychology, the money, and the shifting cultural values that shaped it. Because honestly, the answer to this question completely changes depending on who is actually holding the pen.
Stone within stone. And man, where was he? That's a line from Pablo Neruda, and that visceral poetry perfectly captures the epic, mythical scale of this place. You see, when Yale lecturer Hiram Bingham arrived in Peru back in 1911, he was actually searching for Vilcabamba, the legendary last refuge of the Incas fleeing the Spanish conquistadors. So when he laid eyes on those pristine granite walls of Machu Picchu, he was absolutely convinced he had found a true lost city, completely swallowed by the jungle and forgotten by time. It was this incredibly romantic, captivating narrative, and the world just eagerly devoured it. But there was a glaring flaw in Bingham's story.
Yeah, the reality totally shatters the myth. Get this, 9 full years before Hiram Bingham ever even set foot on that mountain, a local Peruvian farmer and tax collector named Agustin Lizarraga led his own expedition. This was July 14, 1902. Lizarraga was actually pretty famous locally for his skill in scaling these totally inaccessible places, and he went up the ridge with a few companions. The crazy part? He wasn't even looking for a lost city. He was just searching for arable land to plant crops, and in the process, he stumbled upon the breathtaking sanctuary of Machu Picchu.
So the legend gives us Bingham all alone in the untamed jungle. But the historical record? It gives us something entirely different. When Bingham showed up in 1911, he didn't just wander in, he was actively guided by a local man named Melchor Arteaga. And the ruins themselves? They weren't empty at all. The site was actively being used. The Richarte and Alvarez families had actually been living there for years. They were actively cultivating the ancient agricultural terraces and using the fully operational Inca water canals. In fact, Bingham was shown the main urban center of the ruins by an 11-year-old boy named Pablito Richarte. The locals? They always knew it was there.
Now imagine the psychological blow here. Bingham is exploring this spectacular granite architecture, completely expecting to claim this virgin discovery for himself. And then he encounters a devastating piece of physical evidence. Scrawled right there in charcoal on the sacred temple of the three windows was an inscription. It simply read, A. Lizarraga 1902. Wow. Bingham was completely aware he wasn't the first. He even secretly recorded this in his private pocket journal on July 25, 1911, explicitly writing, Agustin Lizarraga is discoverer of Machu Picchu. The proof was literally written on the walls.
Okay, so faced with undeniable proof that someone beat him to the prize, what does Bingham do? Well, his academic ambition totally takes over. First, he photographs the signature, and as we note, notes it in his private journal. But then, a year later during a 1912 excavation, he makes a fateful, deeply calculated decision. He actually orders his workers to scrub Lizarraga's charcoal signature right off the stone, claiming it was for preservation reasons. I mean, wow. With the physical evidence erased, Bingham was suddenly free to publish these wildly successful books that gradually downplayed the locals and ultimately claimed sole discovery of the lost city.
To really understand what happened next, we have to shift our lens from just individual ambition to massive institutional power. You see, the Yale Peruvian expedition wasn't just one guy with a machete. It was a colossal operation built on the financial scaffolding of the Gilded Age. We're talking the academic prestige of Yale University, the massive global publishing platform of the National Geographic Society, direct funding from Bingham's wife's family, which happened to be the Tiffany & Company fortune, and the absolute logistical backing of the Peruvian government under President Augusto Leguía. It was this highly specific combination of immense wealth, corporate philanthropy, and geopolitical interests that made the next phase of this story even possible.
Because to move these ancient artifacts out of the Andes, Bingham needed immense political leverage.
There was actually an 1893 Peruvian law that strictly banned the export of historical relics. So to get around this, Bingham leverages his connections with President Leguía to secure a very specific executive decree in 1912. Basically, the removal of the artifacts was classified under this clever legal loophole. It was officially considered a mere 18-month loan to the United States, purely for the purpose of scientific study. And crucially, Peru explicitly reserved the right to ask for them back. 46,000. Let that number sink in for a second. Under the guise of that so-called 18-month loan, Bingham and his team packed over 46,000 artifacts into 74 heavy wooden crates and shipped them entirely out of the high mountains, all the way to New Haven, Connecticut. This wasn't just, a few cool souvenirs. It was a massive, absolutely unprecedented cultural hemorrhage of an ancient civilization's legacy. And it was carried out through the sheer inertia of colonial-era entitlement.
And we really need to emphasize what was actually in those crates. These weren't just trinkets. They contained the literal, physical, and spiritual history of the Incan people. The expedition extracted osteological remains, meaning the actual skeletons of over 100 individuals. They took beautifully crafted ceramics and pottery, bronze ritual knives known as tumis, intricate silver ornaments, and just countless stone tools. They effectively stripped the sacred site of the exact items that gave it its historical and human context in the first place.
But history is a living, breathing thing. And the socio-political climate back in Peru was changing fast. There was this huge surge in national pride and indigenous appreciation known as indigenismo, and the Peruvian people began demanding their heritage back. After all, the artifacts were legally bound to a loan, right? So the Peruvian government formally requested the return of the objects in 1916, then again in 1918, and again in 1920. But Yale dug their heels in. They resisted, using procedural loopholes, arguing they had invested heavily in preserving the items, and later they even leaned on the state of Connecticut's statute of limitations regarding adverse possession. That 18-month loan? Yeah, it ended up stretching out for nearly a century.
Which brings us to a historic breaking point. After literally decades of diplomatic stalemate, simmering tensions, and failed memorandums of understanding, this conflict finally hit its absolute climax. In 2008, an unprecedented event occurred. A sovereign nation took a private academic institution to court. The Republic of Peru filed a federal lawsuit against Yale University in the U.S. District Court of Connecticut, demanding the immediate return of their cultural patrimony and substantial damages. The stakes had literally never been higher.
The Gilded Age supremacy that originally allowed those artifacts to leave had suddenly collided head-on with a modern legal framework. Backed by the shifting tides of international law and the UNESCO Convention, Peru's claim to its own cultural patrimony just became undeniable. So, under immense public and legal pressure, Yale and Peru finally reached a historic agreement in 2010. And over the course of 2011 and 2012, exactly 100 years after they were taken, the artifacts were flown back on military aircraft to the Casa Concha Museum in Cusco. They finally restored a vital piece of Peru's soul to its rightful home.
Which leaves us with a truly profound question to chew on. Who owns human history? The story of Machu Picchu isn't just about some ancient citadel on a mountain. It's really a mirror reflecting the evolution of how we view the past itself. It forces us to confront this deeply complex legacy of Western exploration versus indigenous exploitation. It makes us ask who gets to write the history books and who actually has the right to hold the physical fragments of our shared human story. It's a massive question that doesn't just apply to Machu Picchu, but to museums and historical sites all over the world today. Definitely something to think about long after this explainer ends.